Welcome everyone to, there's that, thanks Joel, to the Exploring the Future of Artificial Intelligence in Libraries. My name is Derek Jefferson, and I am an associate librarian at American University here in Washington, D.C., and a member of the Sharing Expertise Committee. I'm happy to present this conversation today on behalf of the Sharing Expertise Committee here in WRLC with our colleague from George Mason, Mr. Trevor Watkins. Trevor presented as part of a group at ALA Annual this past summer. And I think this was on the minds of most of the members of the committee. So I want to introduce Trevor so that we can get started. Trevor is the teaching and outreach librarian at George Mason University, waving over to Virginia. He is the communication liaison, so I want to kind of give him a high five for that as the comm librarian here at AU. But I do know that Trevor has a deep history and relationship to computer and information systems, to robotics, information architecture, and knowledge management. Trevor, at some point, we're going to have a conversation of how you got to be working with communications with all this in your background. But we know that you were part of a team that presented at Annual in Chicago this summer that investigated the role of generative AI tools like ChatGPT and how libraries can take on AI, because clearly it's not going away. And if anything, there's more vested interest in how this is affecting pedagogy and instruction and teaching and just academic libraries in general. And so when the SEC was thinking about our fall program for the semester, we thought that this would be a perfect time to have this conversation. So on behalf of the SEC, I want to introduce Trevor Watkins. I'm going to turn my camera off and let you know about my colleague, Peter. Hey, Peter, at George Washington, who's going to be moderating the chat. And thanks everyone for coming out. I hope that this is an enjoyable conversation for everyone. Trevor, take it away.
Thank you very much, Derek. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trevor Watkins, as Derek said, and I'm the Teaching and Outreach Librarian on the Teaching and Learning team at Mason Libraries. Before we begin, I want to thank the WRLC and the SEC for considering me for this presentation. And I also think it's important to acknowledge my positionality in the lens through which I see the field of artificial intelligence. I am an African-American male, he, him, his pronouns, working in the LIS field at an academic institution at an academic library. I also teach computer science courses, information literacy and AI literacy sessions and workshops. And I also engage in BIPOC-related digital projects with faculty, students, and other organizations in the broader academic community across the country. I am also an active researcher and practitioner in the AI field. So let's go ahead and get started. So during this presentation, I'm going to not only talk about my experience, but I'm also going to show you obviously some references, some of my favorite books and articles that I use. And in addition, a little bit later on at the end of the semester, all of the resources that I talk about in terms of some of the classes that I've done with AI, which I'm going to speak about a little bit later. I'm going to share all of that stuff, which includes my lesson plan, my Zotero reading list, all of that information, and feel free to reuse that, but I'll talk about that again a little bit later on. All right, so let's talk about AI. So the foundation of most AI systems, or what is AI, is data. So this can be images, it can be text, it can be numbers, it can be sound, it can be any other kind of information. For AI, especially machine learning, large data sets are used to train models. And so a part of the structure of AI are the algorithms. You probably hear this all the time, algorithms, this algorithm. But there are a set of rules of instructions that guide the AI in processing data and making decisions. In traditional programming, algorithms are explicitly coded by humans. However, in machine learning, algorithms adjust themselves and by learning patterns from the data, right? So the machines can actually create the algorithms themselves. And so there's different types of learning that goes on in AI. You have supervised learning, and in supervised learning, the AI is trained on labeled data, meaning the data input comes in with corresponding output. So if you look at some of the generative AI tools, like ChatGPT, like Bard, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, it is trained on a huge data set using a large language model. You also have unsupervised learning. And unsupervised learning is when it's trained on unlabeled data or unstructured data. So what tends to happen is you use those algorithms to try to find structure from the data itself. So there's a lot of clustering, there's a lot of association that goes along with that as well. And then you also have reinforced learning, where the AI learns by interacting with an environment, and it also receives feedback for its actions. You also have different types of AI. So anytime you hear AI is basically an umbrella term, and that's which is full of different techniques that's used. So I just mentioned machine learning. You also have deep learning. You also have natural language processing, computer vision, and there's a plethora of other different types of AI that actually falls within that category. But it's important to know what that is, because a lot of people sort of misconstrue the concepts or the techniques with AI and with AI. AI is ubiquitous. I think over the past year, the past 2 years, with sort of this rise or this hype with ChatGPT and generative AI, a lot of people tend to think that, okay, AI is now just coming into its maturation. AI is ubiquitous. It's been around for the last 50, 60 years. There has been, progress. There's been situations where that progress has been stalled. And a lot of that is because of limitations in computing power, the limitations in resources, the limitations even in the field. But as that has progressed, now has, the AI field has progressed. So, for example, I use Google Maps when I travel. Google Maps is a fully connected neural network. That's what Google uses. But that's and it uses deep learning. So those are two types of AI techniques that's used in Google Maps. Or if you use Waze, I typically use that sometime if I'm going on a long trip, and if I wanted to, I have a heavy foot and may want to watch out for the police. But those are sort of the AI techniques that's actually used in those applications. And if you have a smart watch, or if you have a smart dryer, a smart refrigerator, anything that has an embedded device or Internet of Things, we talk about IoT, it has some version or some form of AI in it. So that's in billions of devices. All right, so you use it every day, you interface with it every day. So it has already had a major impact on society. And I think in the coming years, it's only going to get better. AI has disrupted some industries in terms of loss in jobs, but it also has created jobs and new opportunities. So I would be remiss if I didn't go and, just briefly talk about give a historical context. And I'm just going to pick 4 examples of AI. And I mean, we can't start talking about AI without talking about Alan Turing. In Alan Turing's paper, if you haven't read it yet, I would even now. I mean, it's it's old. Talking about at least 70 years, but it's still being used today. And even with AI practitioners as they're developing AI, they're still using that as sort of a metric, the Turing test. But when he introduced the Turing test, that was a method to determine whether a machine can actually exhibit intelligent behavior indistinguishable from that of a human. But instead of asking, can machines think? What Turing did was he rephrased that question into, well, can the machines do as we do? So if a machine could imitate a human to the point that a judge couldn't distinguish between them, then it would pass the test. Also in 1956, you had the Dartmouth workshop. And then there was 4 key players in that. And this is where the term artificial intelligence was actually formed. So John McCarthy, who is actually the person who actually created the concept or the term artificial intelligence. You had Marvin Minsky, Nathan Rochester, and Claude Shannon. They organized a conference / workshop, and that's where they coined the term artificial intelligence. The aim was to create machines that could perform tasks requiring human-like intelligence. And artificial, the term artificial, distinguish that machine intelligence from natural human intelligence, while intelligence captures the essence of the problem domain. AI and libraries. Now, AI, like I said, AI is ubiquitous, but AI has actually, or libraries have actually been using AI now for the last 10, 15 years. And it's been used in discovery, so improving search. It's used to develop more sophisticated search algorithms that can better understand the intent of users. And you've probably seen this also, and if you've searched in Amazon, whatever you choose, whatever you purchase, there are some applications now where based on your results, and a lot of public libraries have this in their iOS systems, where it will recommend books, it will recommend articles, or if you're conducting any kind of research, it'll recommend, it'll kind of predict what type of books or what resources you may look on based on what you've already checked out or what you're actually reviewing. You also have automating tasks. So AI can be used to automate many of the repetitive and time-consuming tasks that librarians perform, such as cataloging, classification, and metadata. And with generative AI, that is now used a lot more. So libraries are now sort of cashing in on generative AI, and they're starting to use that. That doesn't come without any problems, but it has proved to be effective, and they're using it in different applications as well. So using those applications, that actually frees librarians up, obviously, to do other things. So as AI becomes more mature, and as we adopt in this particular profession more AI tools, that'll free us up to do other things. It also enhances research. One of the things we're going to talk about today is using generative AI to help researchers, and also use that in the classroom. It can be used to help researchers create literature reviews, systematic reviews, hypothesis generation, data analysis, can help with data management, which can be really important for grant funding. Also provides personalized services. So as I mentioned before, based on what you are actually reviewing or researching, it'll make recommendations. You also have chatbots. No, chatbots haven't come without any issues. There have been some issues in the past where libraries tried to implement chatbots in real time, rather than using, training it on a particular data set, where it actually went out on the internet and had access to the internet. And, it may have come up with homophobic, racist results or output based on what the user's input was. And so most chatbots now use trained data. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. Here are the few examples of AI libraries. Back in 2018, the University of Rhode Island created the first academic library-based AI lab in the country. I had the opportunity to visit the lab and speak to the dean at the time. I was at a conference there, and it was a really cool space. And in that space, they had their STEM librarian. They hired one person that specialized in artificial intelligence, and they collaborated with the computer science department, the engineering department, and then they had members of the community also come up there, and they had workshops. So that was I thought was a really interesting way to sort of bring AI into libraries, to have something like that. And I think at this point, I don't know if there's any other library that has this sort of resource, but URI has that. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to their website, I believe they talk about it. But in this paper right here, they talk a lot about how it came about, how the idea came about, the funding, which the university funded it, and they were able to get grant money for it too. And it's sustainable. So they have funding for it each year. They have different events and workshops and stuff like that. Also, the University of Ottawa and Concordia University in Canada, they created a machine translation literacy service to help international students use it more critically on and off campus, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then you had McGill University Library create an AI literacy workshop series. So besides just AI products, you can create, libraries are doing more to create services for, the library community and the surrounding community as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AI hype and generative AI. So I'm going to begin by talking about artificial narrow intelligence. So we always, anytime that there is any sort of improvement or sort of, we have this new technology, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence, there's all of this excitement around it. But if you look at the information cycle behind it, especially behind ChatGPT, the media sometimes likes to exaggerate on what its capabilities are, what it isn't. So whenever there's a slow news day, oh my God, if you all remember Johnny Five and Short Circuit, no disassemble, the robots are coming, Skynet is coming, it's going to kill everybody, everybody's going to lose their jobs. So there's a lot of exaggeration there, but chatbots, generative AI, and pretty much all AI at this point is what's called artificial narrow intelligence. It's also known as weak AI. So that AI can outperform human beings in the narrowly defined and structured tasks. So if you think about a single function, like an internet search, facial recognition, speech detection, there are some constraints there and limitations. So for example, like I said, ChatGPT and Bard and any of these other generative AI tools are considered weak. So you don't have to worry about ChatGPT creating Skynet. That's some of the absurdity that I heard, not just from the news, but even from the community, because they're listening to the media. General AI is where the field is trying to go. So that's when machines can actually reason and think just like human beings are capable of doing, and beyond. We're not there yet. We're a long way away from that. I'm sure you've probably heard of the lawyer that used ChatGPT for legal research. That resulted in him and his colleague getting in trouble with the judge because they found out that they cited 6 fake cases in their legal brief. But the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because when we talk about job replacement, and again, this over-exaggeration by the media, everybody's going to lose their jobs within 5 years. That's something that I hear quite often. AI, in this particular context, AI is not going to replace lawyers, but lawyers who responsibly and ethically use AI will replace lawyers that do not use it. So in other words, no matter who you are or what field you are in, what type of librarianship that you're in, and I tell this to students and I tell this to faculty, but more so to students because, I get a lot, especially this semester, a lot of students are worried about, once they graduate, what are they walking into? And one of the things I tell them is, well, no matter what field you're in, learn the tools because, you're going into a society that is dominated by artificial intelligence. And so learn the tools in the profession that you're trying to go into. And this is something that you probably, for those of you that are here today, and you work with students, you kind of relay that information to them as well, so that they're prepared when they get out in the field. Because when it comes to hiring, companies now, if you look at I've looked at some of the job sites, and most of them are asking for some level of AI or some level of working with AI tools. So that's very important. AI hype is simply expectations and promises with AI technologies that are typically, like I said before, brought on by the media. So anytime any particular kind of technology like artificial intelligence comes to fruition, there is always this hype in terms of, how long is it going to last? How long is it going to sustain itself? If we look at social media, you had MySpace died, went on to the next new thing, and then to the next new thing. And so when we look at generative AI, it's actually lasted longer in terms of the hype. And I get this question a lot as well. How long do I think generative AI will last? I think as long as it is profitable for these companies, it will maintain its presence, but you will see new features come out. Similar to operating system wars between Microsoft and Apple and Linux. One tries to outdo the other, or even the smartphones. You look at iOS versus Android. With each new phone, you have new features, and one kind of one up the other. But as long as it's lucrative for them, the smartphone at some point is going to go into a whole nother realm of communication. And there's some papers out there now that talks about that. But as long as it's profitable, AI or generative AI is going to be here to stay. In fact, OpenAI, which are the adopters of ChatGPT, are now valuated at between $80 to $90 billion. And at the end of this year, they expect it to have generated $1 billion in revenue, and there are over 1.2 million users, and that is growing. So no time soon will we have to worry about, ChatGPT and Bard and those kind of tools are no longer useful or not being used because it's, again, is financially viable or you know, for companies. All right, so let's turn to AI ethics. Oops, let me go back. So I have a QR code here, and this QR code goes to an Etherpad. So what I want you to do, and Peter, if you could put that link into the chat, I have a question for everyone. Okay, based on what you know ethics to be, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Any Etherpad, I know there's a lot of people, there's 73 people in here, but what I want you to do is pick a line, and I want you to answer this question. If AI makes a critical mistake, who is responsible? Is it the developer? Is it the user? Is it the organization deploying it? I want you to select one of those or one or more, depending upon what you think, and give a brief explanation of why you feel this way below. All right, I'm going to give y'all about 3 minutes to do that. And then we'll come back to ethics at the end of this discussion.
And let me know if I need to resend that link, but I think it got to everybody.
And while you all are writing, AI, you know, ethics in general addresses the moral and societal implications. And when it comes to AI, it addresses those implications of artificial intelligence. And ethics can be based on your culture, it can be based on your religion, and some people have different ethical perspectives than others. And ethics mean different things. You know, companies that are making a profit off of something, they have a different set of ethics than you as the user. And so again, that is usually fueled by profit and, you know, and monetary gain. But I'm interested, I really am curious on what you all think. This specifically has been one of the topics of discussion in some of the ACM, which is the Association of Computing and Machinery, some of those threads, and in some circles that you know, circles of friends who are also practitioners in the field. This is something that we've had pretty heated debates over. Yeah, I see some really good stuff here. Some people say the user. Some people say it depends on the specific case. That's really good. Someone said whoever is responsible, the person who causes the harm, which will often be the user. Someone said all three. That's very good. Some people said the developer. And it was very interesting. I'm glad someone mentioned that. I'm glad somebody mentioned all three, because that was one of the things that we were talking about. If you are someone that's developing this AI, and I'm certainly I have a couple of projects that I'm working on at Mason Libraries. But if you develop an AI and let's say you run some tests on it and you find out that it's error prone, or it has some issues to cause error. So we think about the health sciences field, or we think about healthcare. If you're deploying a system that uses AI and it kills a patient, is the developer responsible? Is the company responsible? Well, the developer could, some people say, and some of the argument is, well, the developer can basically choose to say, no, I'm not going to do this, or, I'm not going to put my name behind it. I refuse to work on, this project, and then they can become a whistleblower. You've probably seen that in a lot of instances with corporations. But then you also have people where, I have a family, and if I don't do this, then I'll get fired. So I'm going to go ahead and, I'm going to do what I'm told. And so some might say, well, that falls on the organization. But, organizations or corporations are protected. If you get sued as an individual, you don't have such protections. So those are some really interesting topics or comments that came out of that. But it's something that I think of when I'm developing products or AI applications, and even when I'm using them as well, depending upon the situation. All right, so I'm going to move on, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. All right, there is this book. It's a really good book. If there's anyone on this call right now who does any subject liaison to the chemistry department, or is just interested in data science and chemistry, this is a really good book. I'm about halfway through it. It's a book by Thorsten Gressling, and it's titled Data Science and Chemistry, AI, Big Data, Chemometrics, and Quantum Computing with Jupyter. I highly recommend this book, especially if you are a subject librarian for chemistry, as I said before, or if you have an interest in that area. But AI has always played a significant role in research across numerous disciplines. We use AI to create and analyze large data sets by identifying patterns, anomalies, and any correlations in that data. One thing that I would say also about AI and research, and I'll kind of talk about what I did over the summer. I worked with 3 professors over the summer. I was included in 2 grants. And in those grants, and one of those grants, we decided it wasn't something where, we had to use AI. But I was like, hey, this would be a great time to try to use these tools and see how effective they are. And so what we did was, one, we used it to search in open access databases. I thought Bard did a really good job of doing that versus ChatGPT. We also used it to create search strings, to create keywords, to modify some of the research problems, create synonyms and antonyms to those search strings. And it got it right probably 90% of the time. One of the problems that we saw is that sometimes it used keywords that wasn't relative to the research. It just pulled out keywords that it thought made sense. But 90% of the time it got it right. But yeah, librarians, the one thing about having that subject knowledge is you can offer specialized training on using AI tools in that subject area. So whatever you're a subject librarian in, if it's education, if it's psychology, and if you're a staff member and you're using it for whatever your job is, having that domain knowledge in that particular area that you're an expert in, allows you to use that tool effectively. You can anticipate and cater to researchers' needs better, which allows you to recommend what tools to use and justify the recommendation of using that tool. And you can guide researchers on the ethical considerations and data management best practices. So when I'm working with students, more specifically students that are doing dissertations in the communications field, specifically over the summer too, that was a big sort of research. Those 3 months, the little hair I did have, I was pulling that out. But we use these tools pretty effectively, and it really helped them out during that process. So one of the reasons why things worked so effectively when we were using ChatGPT and Bard is prompt engineering. And I can't stress how important being able to refine. It's kind of similar to, if you're searching in databases and you put in keywords and you put in search strings and you don't get, let's say you get too many results, you don't get as many results as you want, or you don't get enough relevant results, you refine that search. Maybe you switch out keywords, maybe you switch up search strings. Maybe you search by a specific date, a specific format, or publication, maybe a different geographic region, whatever the case may be. You are refining that search. It's iterative. Same is the case with prompt engineering. When you're using ChatGPT or when you're using Bard, if you don't get the results that you need the first time, all you need to do is go back and you refine that prompt. So prompt engineering refers to the art and science of crafting effective input prompts to guide AI models, especially large language models like ChatGPT and Bard, to produce that desired results. And this is specifically because large language models, they rely on that input to generate those responses. So based on the specificity in your prompts, that will elicit the answer that you're looking for, or the output that you're looking for. So in other words, you have guided responses. So if you carefully design those prompts, you can guide the AI to generate more accurate, concise, or contextually appropriate responses. So when I was working with those researchers over the summer, before we even got to the interface to use ChatGPT, we sat down and we actually came up with some search strings. We came up with some keywords based on what the research was, which it was climate change. And then what we did is we prompted ChatGPT to create additional keywords, create additional search strings. And then we sort of refined those asks, once we got the results. In some cases, we didn't get what we were looking for. In other cases, we got exactly what we were looking for. And then in terms of tasks, for specific tasks like translation, summarization, or code generation, crafting the prompt in a particular way can optimize the AI's output for that task. So I mentioned before, one of the projects that I'm working on at Mason Libraries is a chatbot called MoCA, which stands for Mason Libraries Orientation Conversational Agent. Excuse me. And there is a part of it where, I am actually using generative AI, more specifically ChatGPT, to code certain modules of it. So that's made it easier for me to kind of move the project along. This is a project that I started in 2021. I initially was using only an expert system, which is a branch of AI. But once generative AI got to the point to where it is now, I began to use it. And it works pretty efficiently. I have to probe it a little bit to get it to create the code that I use, but it's pretty efficient. I would probably say there are errors in probably 50% of the code that it creates, but it's easy for me to go in and debug it. But it could write, 800 lines of code, 900 lines of code, and it's easy for me to go through it because I already have, the other code that's there. And I've been a software engineer for quite some time, but it's been, even at a 50% rate, it's still been pretty effective and helpful for me to move the project along, in terms of what I'm working on. Prompt engineering is good for handling ambiguity. So if you have a really well-engineered prompt, it can reduce that ambiguity. Because as you know, some of your results or some of the output, if you ask, ChatGPT or Bard a certain question or give it a certain task, some of that output can be ambiguous. So if you sort of mitigate that ambiguity, that will align more with the intent of what your original task was from the beginning. Also, reliability. Certain phrasing might lead to more consistent and reliable answers from the AI model. So that's something that you also have to consider as well. And then bias. Mitigating bias is important. We all have bias in some form or fashion. So one of the things that I also recommend, before you actually get to the prompt, is try to do that as best as you can. Because effective prompt engineering can assist in generating unbiased and inappropriate responses. If you don't, then you will get that biased in your output. So a lot of people ask me what generative AI tool that I prefer, and I actually, for research, I prefer Bard over ChatGPT. Here's a couple of examples that I posted here. So one of the reasons why I prefer Bard over ChatGPT is because of the use of Google Scholar. One advantage is that Bard is actually integrated throughout the entire Google ecosystem. So think about Google Scholar, Google Citations, and when you're searching the databases and you're using Google Scholar, and one of the things that we always do is we show students how to connect Google Scholar so that when they're searching, if they want to search Google Scholar, and whatever results they come back, if it's in full text, if the university has access to that or has that document, it'll go directly to that document. But as you can see in both of these different prompts, I asked Bard, using Google Scholar as your resource, give me a list of 5 scholarly articles in the past year on generative AI. And it came up with these 5 scholarly articles. So it gave you the title, it gives you the authors, it gives you the journal, it gives you the DOI. So it's easy to check to substantiate whether or not this is it's not actually hallucinating. And AI hallucination, which is one of the errors that generative AI typically in some cases elicit. But this is very, very helpful, and it also gives the abstract. So it pulls out that information. So instead of me, if I decided to use the databases, I'd have to go article by article, look at the abstract here. It pulls all, and this is using Google Scholar only, but it pulls this information up And I use Google Scholar quite often in tandem with the databases when I'm conducting my own research. But when I asked ChatGPT to do the same thing, it couldn't, right? So again, it doesn't have access to any external databases. Obviously, Google Bard is integrated with Google throughout the entire Google ecosystem. So all of Google's products, Bard has access to, and it can, based on what you're asking it to do, whether that's email through Gmail, or even citations. If you want to ask for, what's the latest citations, which is in the next slide. Right here, I asked it if, I picked the title from that last prompt, and I asked it, using Google Scholar and citations as your resource, tell me how many times generative AI for scientific discovery has been cited. So it goes on to tell me exactly how many times it's actually been cited. And then it also gives you a couple of papers that actually cited that article. So when we talk about citation mining, more specifically forward chaining, and this is something that I showed the students, this is a very useful strategy to use in terms of if you're using Google Scholar. This will make your research or your search process go rather quicker than if you were just using the databases alone. So this is something that I've been doing over the past couple of months, and it has worked very efficiently. But I prefer Bard over ChatGPT, in a research context. So the next thing we're going to talk about is AI in the classroom. So I've listened to many discussions, and we've had discussions in our library about ethics and concerns about academic integrity when using AI in the classroom. And I imagine that being able to use AI in the classroom is going to depend on the professor, the institution, and their concept of cheating. I have yet to see an institution that has clearly defined cheating in the context of AI tools. If you scan the QR code on the left, it will take you to GMU's Student Honor Code, where we discuss what cheating is. But the only thing it says about AI is including the unauthorized use of AI software. Very vague, very ambiguous. And so if a student sees that, okay, well, what if the professor doesn't come out and openly say you can't use it, if they actually use it, and let's say the professor runs it through Turnitin or some of these AI checkers, or they find out that the student used ChatGPT and failed them. If it's not in the syllabus, then the student, they would have a case. And if they tried to expel the student, this is one of the conversations we had in one of our community of practices that was started by our computing librarian, this could potentially open up universities to lawsuits if they start expelling students for using it. So I think that universities should do a better job, or they need to do a better job of actually defining the use of AI tools, when to use it, when not to use it, if it's actually cheating, how is it cheating? There needs to be more description there, and it right now, currently, it does not. In the QR code on the right, that is MSU Texas. It mentions the use of AI tools as a course level decision. But does that decision belong to the professors? Does it belong to the instructors? Does it belong to the dean? Again, it is vague and ambiguous at best. So food for thought. And this quote came from one of our peer institutions in Virginia. The challenge for faculty is how we prepare students to be in a world that is dominated by AI. So considering that, how can we tell students that they can't use AI when they're getting ready to enter a field that's dominated by AI? So you can kind of see the dilemma there. So I think that that's something that has to sort of be worked out. As a research librarian, as a subject librarian, when I help students, in my opinion, I work, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment. This is the first semester that I've worked with a professor to actually integrate this into the classroom. But I think it's important to prepare the students, and part of my job, at least from my purview, is to do that. And so when asked by students, I show them the ethical way of using it. One of the other really interesting things that we talked about in one of our community practices, or during our community practice, actually this week, was this article in the Chronicle of Higher Ed. Instead of policing students, we need to abolish cheating, right? Think about that. Can we abolish cheating? Should we abolish cheating? Or will this, in some cases, in the next 2 or 3 years, change the way that the way that the university operates? Will the grading scale change? This is something that our assessment librarian brought up during that conversation. Will we, to sort of abolish cheating, will we have to go away from the grading system and just go with just project-based projects where there is no grade to it? All right. So that's something interesting. And also, university faculty should think beyond plagiarism when it comes to ChatGPT and ethics. So, we can sit and, talk about how if we use ChatGPT, that's plagiarism. But I really found it interesting when this all came out. If you look at APA, MLA, Chicago Tuberian, all those writing styles, they now have, if you're doing a reference or an in-text citation, they now have it for generative AI. So they went and rushed and put that there. So again, it's still being, in some cases, faculty are telling their students not to do it, but there are more faculty that are accepting it. So that's also something very interesting. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit real quick about what I'm doing this semester in terms of using AI tools in the classroom. And so I mentioned I'm on the teaching and learning team. So besides communication, we also work with the English department. So I'm teaching an English 101 class this semester, I'm embedded in this particular course. And there's a professor that I work with every fall semester to teach students how to conduct research for class assignments and class projects. All of his students are always FYE students or first year students, and they are always STEM students. I don't know how that's come to be, but that's always the case, and it's the same here. All the students are STEM, and they're all FYE students. So we spoke in the summer, and I said, this would be a great opportunity to try this in the classroom. And I said, what do you think about, about this? And we had a conversation about, the risks or the concerns. And it's like, well, we'll do it this way. I'll come in, I'll talk about the fundamentals of information literacy in the first class, and in the second class, we'll start using the actual tools. So what they're working on, and I visited them in week 7, so I visited them last week and coming back in week 9, which is next week, where we're actually use Bard and ChatGPT in the classroom. So, and then the third session that we're going to have virtually is using Grammarly, so that students can use that to write more effectively. However, that's actually not mandatory. But in the first session last week, we went over research topic development, the information cycle with the focus on gray literature. We also talked about creating research questions and showed them how to do that, finding and evaluating sources. So we went over Boolean operators, creating search strings, all of those things, searching specialized databases, searching open source databases or open access databases, citation mining, keyword generation. We did all of those things and evaluating sources. So in the next class, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to actually use those AI tools to do it. So the emphasis here is to actually show the difference between doing this manually, doing it on your own versus the aid of an actual tool to do that. So since these were first-year students, I was very curious about their thoughts about ChatGPT. For example, do they know what it is? Have they used it before? How did they use it? Especially, I was really curious about, basically the last 6 months before, or like during the spring, before they came to Mason, what they did in their senior year. Did they do anything in high school, or are they aware of ChatGPT or other generative AI tools? So I wanted to gather as much information as I could, which aided in the design of that instruction. So I created a pre-test survey for that purpose, and then a post-test survey to measure their growth, and also to compare and contrast how they use the tool, if at all, for the current assignment they're working on and upcoming assignments for the remainder of the semester. So this also includes consultations. So after the first session, I had a lot of students come visit me in the library, and so which was very good. So I'm really curious to see how in the second session after that, how they're going to feel about ChatGPT afterwards. And as I said before, we're going to actually use Grammarly, and that'll be in week 10. But this QR code to the left is going to guide you to everything I created for this course. It's not there yet, but it will be available at the conclusion of this semester. So I know that this is recorded. So if I would say around December 15th, come back, scan it, and I'll have the pre-assessment test, post-assessment test, and all of the resources that I use, including the lesson plan, as I talked about at the beginning, for this course, and a lot of the data as well, for anyone that's interested in that. And feel free to reuse anything in any classes that you have upcoming. All right. So now some hands-on stuff, hands-on exercise. So what I want you to do now, if you don't have ChatGPT, if you don't have Bard, they're both free. If you don't, ChatGPT has a version 3.5, which is free. And for Bard, as long as you have if you have a Google account, because your data is compensation for using those applications for free. But what I want you to do is I want you to compare and contrast both of these tools. So over the next 20, I would say next 20 minutes, and we still have some time. What I want you to do is I want you to imagine you had to do a research paper on ethical AI in libraries. I want you to generate 10 keywords, come up with 3 research questions, and find at least 5 sources using both ChatGPT and Bard. And then after probably at the 20-minute probably at the 20-minute mark, what I'm going to do is going to ask you to put your preference in the chat. And I'll say, go, and then you either put down ChatGPT or Bard. All right, so I'm going to give you the next 20 minutes to work on this. If you have any questions, put that in the chat for this specific exercise. Sarah asks, I'm worried about the privacy issues related to using these tools. Is there a way to use them without exposing your data? Yes. So in terms of ChatGPT, if you create a free account, the only data that you can just make up a name. I certainly did that for a free account. So I don't have my actual name. I created, if you don't have a ChatGPT account, and if you have, some email that's laying around, or create a fake email, that's something that I also, told students to do. If you're not comfortable about that, use a fake email, create a ChatGPT account, and the same thing for Google as well. That way your data is not exposed. So you're not giving your actual data, your actual name, or any of that kind of information. And with ChatGPT, once you start entering information in the prompt, you can actually delete that entire, who's to say that, that data isn't captured, but according to OpenAI, if, once, any information that you put into the prompt can be deleted. You can basically delete that. So because if you don't delete it, then they'll actually they'll use that to train, they'll train on that data. I hope that answers your question. So while y'all are doing that, I am also going to, I'm going to plug this in. How do we delete the data? So I'm going to show you in a few seconds. Give me 1 second. I'm pulling up ChatGPT right now. And I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to stop sharing on the PowerPoint for just a second. And then I'm going to share my chat GPT prompt. All right. So by default, you should have GPT 3.5. So here on the left, when you start a conversation, so if I started a new chat, or if you had a chat right here, you just click on it and then you click delete, and then it's gone. So anything that you put in the chat, you can automatically delete it. So if I'm here conducting literature review, boom, delete it. Okay. And you can also close the sidebar if you need a little bit more information. So I said generate 10 keywords. So I'm going to do this along with you guys. All right, so the first prompt that I gave is I'm conducting research for a journal on AI ethics in academic libraries, generate 10 relevant keywords that I can use to search Google Scholar and other research databases. So it came up with AI ethics, academic libraries, artificial intelligence in libraries, library automation, data privacy, ethical considerations, algorithmic bias, information ethics, digital collections, and ethical decision-making in libraries. All right, now I'm going to ask it to create 3 research questions. And so what I'm doing is I'm going to pick this out of the keywords that it gave as output. So create 3 research questions on algorithmic bias So create 3 research questions on the algorithmic bias in search and discovery systems used by academic libraries. So I have 3 research questions. To what extent do algorithmic biases in search discovery systems impact the accessibility and inclusivity of academic library resources? And what are the potential consequences for underrepresented groups in academia, which is a pretty good research question. How do the design, development, and deployment process of search and discovery algorithms in academic libraries contribute to or mitigate algorithmic bias, and what best practices can be recommended for minimizing bias in these systems? All right, and then the third, what strategies and policies can academic libraries implement to increase transparency, accountability, and fairness in the use of algorithmic research and discovery systems, ensuring that users have equal access to information and resources while addressing potential biases. So the next thing we're going to ask you to do is find at least 5 scholarly articles that address research questions. And then I'm going to say, justify your responses. So as you can see, I'm unable to perform real-time internet searches or access external databases to find specific scholarly articles, as my training data only goes up until 2021. However, I can suggest search strategies. All right. So again, this is one of the reasons why I prefer BARD. Now, as you can see, it did give you 5. So what I would typically do is go and see if this is actually a true article. So I would go, it says the ACM Digital Library. So I'm going to go to the ACM. There we go. And let's see if that title is in here. All right. So right now, I don't see that in here at all. Let me try another source. Oh, that's a preprint. Let me go to IEEE. Let me do that. See if that's actual real. Plug the title here. All right. So it's not there. So you would go through the process of checking these to see if it actually exists, and so far none of them do. All right. So again, although they've rolled out some new features, do you think these are actual real or just not showing up for some reason? Well, that's a very good question, Peter. I think that, and this is actually happened in some searches that I have, where it actually creates, it'll create a source. It'll actually give the title. It'll give an author. It'll actually give a source, and it actually is it can be actually incorrect. But you can do some further digging. Yeah, so they're not real. But you can also do some further digging and look up the authors as well. There's been situations where I've actually, well,
Yeah, it was interesting. Like when I was using Bard, I would ask for the citations and I was like, hey, can you give me the complete citation? Hey, can you give me the DOI? And I actually haven't gone through to check them yet, but it was like this iterative thing where it did it. But
yeah, and then, so in Bard it works. But there you have to be careful too. You always have to check, because I've also asked Bard, it'll actually provide a link. But then I've checked the link, and the link goes back and there's nothing there. So you also have to be really careful. Even though it'll give you something, always double check to make sure that is correct. Thank you, Amal. Not AI related at all. And Valerie said that Bard gave me a source with a link, and the link leads to a molecular physics page, not AI related at all. And that's another great point. It may give you something, but the link may be incorrect. And it may not, it may see something where the language, there might be something, maybe it says Chat GPT, and it'll see that particular word, and it'll say, okay, well, this is an article that talks specifically about that. So when I was looking for different universities that were, how they were actually using Chat GPT, and I asked Bard, it talked about the University of Michigan, and it said University of Michigan was using a chatbot, and it provided a link. I clicked that link to go back, and nothing was there. Then I went on the University of Michigan Library's website and searched to see, if they were working on a chatbot. No results came up. So it's important that you definitely check to make sure, even if you use that, always check to make sure that it's working or not. But that's, and I like Chat GPT until I needed sources, then I prefer Bard, so I'm not sure which I like. Yeah, so I've worked with both of these over the summer, and it was more so of a forced thing because, I was working with faculty. It wasn't something I had planned to do. I planned to take the summer, a little bit light because I don't have instruction in the summer, and I was going to use that just to work on projects. But it forced me to actually use it, and during that process, like out of the two for doing research, I prefer Bard specifically for the Google Scholar part of it. So David asks, what causes the hallucinations? And that is a very good question, David. What I can say is what I've heard from OpenAI, because this is something that OpenAI has talked about. And actually, what I find interesting is OpenAI has been working on it, on hallucinations for a while now. The last interview that I saw with the CEO of OpenAI, he basically said that it's basically a feature of ChatGPT now. So so that's something that, I think that I don't know if they're ever going to figure it out, but the reason or how it's caused because of if there's any sort of insufficient or outdated data or low quality data that's been trained on. So considering that 3.5 has been trained on 2021, GPT-4 in 2022, you're going to have some issues, especially depending upon what your research, whatever you're prompting, whatever you're putting into the prompt, whatever task you're giving it, there may be some insufficient, there may be outdated, there may be low quality data that's in that large language model. And so that is what causes the hallucinations, but nobody, to my knowledge right now, has been able to figure that out. And I think, based on the CEO of OpenAI, they've basically accepted that this isn't either one, they've accepted that, this is probably too difficult to do, or, like software, Microsoft comes up with a new version to fix, things that are broken in, previous versions of the operating system. Like Mac just came out with a new operating system. Our IT here at Mason says don't update to the new operating system because it's, if you do, it's going to break other applications. And so what Apple will do, it'll get that feedback and then it'll do an update. And then that update, it'll fix those issues. But, they try to push that new technology out because, again, they want to sell, devices. And so now it's basically, it becomes a version sort of thing. We know that there's going to be errors in it, there's going to be some issues, but we'll eventually fix it in the next version. So in GPT-6 or 7, maybe we'll figure it out, but right now in GPT-4, 3.5, that's just a feature. Hallucination is just a feature of it. But that's a great question. All right, so what I'm going to do now is we only have a couple of minutes left. If I can find, here we go. Share this, here we go. All right, any questions or any final questions? We have about 5 minutes. I'm sorry I took up a little bit more time than I wanted to on that hands-on exercise, but does anybody have any questions?
I think there was one in the chat.
Okay, Sarah asks, is anyone looking into the ethical implication of these errors and how they increase the access gap for users? That's a really good question. I don't know if specifically they're looking at it from the standpoint of that particular, access gap. But I think that, what OpenAI and some of these other generative AI products, if certain, like you talk about researchers, if they can't really effectively use that tool because of that, if it's not reliable, then they're not going to use that, which again, that omits a certain part of, your bottom line. Because if certain people can't rely on the technology to at least work some of the time, not all the time, that's going to eliminate people that's actually going to, they'll maybe keep the free version, but they're not going to pay for the for the plus version of it. But that's a very good question. But I assume that they're looking into it, and I think and that's one thing they keep saying, and the next version is going to be improved. But I know that AI hallucinations is one of the major problems with generative AI, and this is something that everybody says that they're working on. Any other questions? Oh, thank you. Okay, well, thank you all for coming today on your Friday. I really appreciate you taking the time to not, get in your car and leave and, spend the, these last couple, this last hour and a half with us and with me. Please contact me with any questions, or if you want to see any additional resources, please reach out. It's twatkin8@gmu.edu. And I'll see you all somewhere, sometime soon.
Thanks very much. This was great.
Thank you, Trevor. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, WRLC family. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.